Welcome back to the Making International in Korea video series. In this video, I'm going to explaining on Supreme Court decision on forced labor. For example, the first suit against Mitsubishi Heavy Industry. On December 11, 1995, the victims of the forced labor and Mitsubishi Heavy Industry filed a suit against Japanese government and the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries at the Hiroshima District Court for unlawful acts and for violation of international law, demanding payments of outstanding wages, damages, and compensation. The Hiroshima District Court found that concerning the conscription, the circumstances of the victims, that the conscription of the plaintiff under the law at the time cannot be an unlawful act in itself, nor can the process of a conscription pursuant to the law be called a violation of the law, and thus rejects the claim of forced conscription and forced labor made by the victims. While the court didn't recognize some of the claims of the victims as being true, such as the Japanese munitions companies unlawfully driving them to forced labor, unlike their prior explanations, failure to pay out wages properly, failure to implement safety precautions, it still held that the right to request compensation for such damages had already lapsed, since the statute of limitation has expired for the right to claim unpaid wages, and even if it had not, the rights were extinguished by the 1965 Claims Agreement between Korea and Japan. The victims appealed to the Hiroshima High Court, and while the case was still in progress, they filed the same suit against Mitsubishi Heavy Industries before the Busan District Court of Korea on May 1st, 2000. When the Hiroshima High Court also dismissed the case on January 19, 2005, the victims filed the appeal again, but this time to the highest court of Japan. On February 2nd, 2007, the Busan District Court ruled similarly, stating that the victims' right to compensation for damages and payment of wages was extinguished. The Supreme Court of Japan also dismissed the victims' case on November 1st, 2007, thereby concluding the proceedings in Japan. Then the victims appealed the decision of the District Court to the Busan High Court, but the same dismissed the appeal on February 3rd, 2009, for reason of res judicata following the final decision in Japan. How about lawsuit against New Nippon Steel Corporation? On December 24, 1997, the victims of forced labor at Nippon Steel Corporation filed suit against Japanese government and the New Nippon Steel Corporation at the Osaka District Court for unlawful act and for violation of international law, demanding payment of outstanding wages and damages and compensation. The Osaka District Court dismissed the case on March 27, 2001 for the same reasons at the Hiroshima District Court. It further added that Nippon Steel Corporation, for which the victim provided service at the time, was dissolved pursuant to Japan's Emergency Corporate Accounting Measure Law and Corporation Reconstruction and Maintenance Law, and ceased to exist. It held that the current New Nippon Steel Corporation is of independent legal personality from that of previous Nippon Steel Corporation, on which legal responsibility does not transfer. And even if it did, the rights of victims were extinguished pursuant to the 1965 Claims Agreement, and thus they declared the plaintiff lost. The victims appealed to the Osaka High Court, but the appeal was dismissed on November 1902 and the entire proceedings came to end on October 9, 2003, when Supreme Court rejected the case. When the case closed in Japan, the victims filed the same claim before the Seoul Central District Court of Korea on February 28, 2005, against Nippon Steel Corporation. However, the Seoul Central District Court also dismissed the case on April 3, 2008, for the reasons of res judicata, pursuant to the final decision of Japan's court. The victims appealed the Seoul High Court, but were again denied for the same reason on July 2009. Let me touch upon the decision of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court stated, in determining international jurisdiction, we must follow the basic principles of equity for both parties, fairness of trial, speed, and economy. More specifically, not only must individual interests be considered, such as fairness, convenience, and foreseeability for the parties to the litigation, but also state or judicial consideration of fairness, speed, efficiency, and effectiveness of trial. Among these various considerations, determining which interests need protection must be rationally determined by considering each individual case, practical relevance of the party to the forum, and the relevance between the forum and the issue at dispute as objective criteria. Based on this premise, the court stated that the damages claimed resulting from the unlawful act in this case arise from the enforced mobilization of the previous Nippon Steel Corporation together with the state of Japan, but the purpose of the forced labor, because the act of putting such mobilized person to forced labor is an unlawful act for which the plaintiff is claiming the defendants bear the liability of the previous Nippon Steel Corporation. In consideration of the fact that Korea, together with Japan, was a locus delicti, where the party of act in a series of unlawful acts has occurred, the plaintiff victims reside in Korea, and that the issues are intimately related to historical and political changes. The court held that it had jurisdiction over the case because Korea had de facto connection with the parties and the issues of this case. Let me touch upon lastly the significance of the Supreme Court decision. The Korea has been greatly influenced by Japan since Japanese occupation of the prison in its legal system, judicial administration, and interpretation of the law and application of legal reasoning. Thus, there have been many instances in which the decisions of the Japanese court have acted as precedents accepted without question. Likewise, in this case, the district and high court accepted the effect of decisions of the Japanese court because they supposedly did not violate good morals and social order of Korea and dismissed the petitions of the victims. I'm going to give you a wrap-up for this week's lecture series. Korea-Japan, having experienced a history of Japan's occupation in a relationship as an occupying power and its colony, cannot be free from the important historical issues of the past. From the territorial dispute to historical understanding, cultural differences, and economic cooperation, there are many challenges yet to be overcome. Some of these challenges can be peacefully overcome through diplomatic efforts from a future-oriented perspective on the part of both countries. However, as far as the war crimes concerned, as for war crimes committed during the Japanese occupation period, avoiding legal responsibility will not settle the past as long as specific identifiable victims exist. As living witnesses and victims of history, the sufficient compensation as a sincere policy would be the proper way to resolve the issue. An effort toward this end would be the duty and reason for the existence of the state. The Korean government cannot be free from criticism concerning their passive attitude toward the representative the historical issues of comfort to women and forced labor. More specifically, in negotiating post-war compensation following liberation, it hastily used an all-inclusive term all claims in concluding the 1965 claims agreements, thereby creating an obstacle to the realization of victims' right to claim. It also neglected the victims for a long time without having taken initiative to remove those obstacles. In the meantime, many of the victims have passed away without having received compensation or apology. Therefore, intervention of the judiciary in these historical issues through affirmative decisions hold great significance.